So you're all very welcome back. This final session is a broad overview of agriculture and climate change. I'm going to ask the panellists to join me on stage now. We're going to play a film in 1 minute, but just to let you know, Minister Heydon will be returning to make closing remarks, and we would appreciate it if people could stay around for the closing remarks just to close off the conference, would be appreciated. But in the meantime, we're going to play a film, and I'll ask our many panellists to join me on stage, please, while that's happening.
The cows being milked here this morning, these are highly productive animals producing high quality milk, and what my job is about is trying to figure out which of these animals are producing less methane without any compromise in productivity. I'm a geneticist, so I look at the individual genes, and we know where all these genes are for milk production, fertility and health. And the question that we're posing now is, can we actually find the genes associated with methane production in these animals? Calves are the most important resource on the farm because they're your next generation. And traditionally, these calves would have been bred for economically important traits like milk yield or meat quality and yield. What we want to know now, of course, is genetically how much methane are they going to produce. We can take a sample of the animal's ear, and the genetic code is within that will tell us not just how productive they're likely to be, but also how much methane they're likely to produce.
So this is a green feed unit. It is used to measure gas emissions from cows, predominantly methane emissions. So what happens is the cow puts her head into this unit. It's got an RFID reader on the inside to read her tag, and it drops some concentrate pellets from a bunker up in here. And then as she's eating, she's huffing and puffing away, expelling the methane from her breath. The air is being drawn past here and it's being captured by the machine. And the methane's getting subsampled and compared against the background concentrations of methane in the atmosphere. So these machines are only snapshots of what the cow's producing. It is only 2 minutes out of that full 24 hours. So as we can get multiple snapshots at different times of the day, we can start building a bit of a profile of what she's producing.
The Roadmap project has been going for just over a year now. We've one of the largest databases in the world in dairy, in beef and in sheep on individual animals, how much methane they are producing. So the question that we had was, how much of that variability is actually due to genetic differences? And in fact, around 20 to 30% of the variability in methane we see amongst animals is due to genetic variability that we can exploit within our national breeding programs. So this is the outcome from all of our research, where farmers can go online, they can search individual bulls and how much methane they are likely to produce and their progeny are likely to produce, in combination, of course, with all the other economically important traits. So we can see here, this top bull here, he has methane information on 325 of his progeny, and he is favourable for methane. So he will produce less methane than the average. Him or his progeny are expected to produce around 5 grams less methane per day, which sounds a small amount, but then when you push that across 6.5 million cattle in the country, that could be quite substantial. We see around a 10 to 20% difference in the methane output of individual animals holding their production the same. And from that, we can see that around 20 to 30% is actually due to genetics. That's crucially important for us as animal breeders, because we're all about finding the animals that are genetically the best or genetically the worst. So just looking at those animals, you don't know which of those are genetically the best. We need to look into that individual capsule of DNA and see, yes, they have the good milk genes, the good fertility genes, the good growth genes, but they also have the bad methane genes. And they're the animals then that you want to select her within this breeding program, where we rank the animals not just on their environmental credentials, but really importantly on their economic sustainability.
So there you have it. I'll introduce you to our panel now. We've got Bill Callanan, Chief Inspector of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine; Mary Donnelly, Chair of the Climate Change Advisory Council; Frank O'Mara, Director of Teagasc; Edwin Thompson, a Tipperary dairy farmer. We have lost track of everyone. Seán Molloy, CEO of Tirlán, and then we have been joined by Oonagh Buckley, Secretary General at the Department of Environment, Climate and Communication. So all present and accounted for, and you're all very welcome. Bill, if we can start, you're the department's representative on the panel and you're hosting today's conference. So from your perspective and from the department's perspective, why is this conference important to you? And it's being held on a more regular basis now, I think, as well, is it?
Yeah, this is the second time we've had a conference event like this, but I suppose the first thing I'd like to congratulate is everybody that's in the audience here, because it's been a long day and there's true resilience by having stuck with us this long.
They're full of caffeine at this stage, Bill.
Either we'll have to shake them up now and just keep with us for the last hour, but we'd like to recognise that, but also the work of the team in putting it together. I'd distill it into 3 key messages I'd like to give. So the first thing is, this is the 3rd day of a Global Research Alliance meeting that's been held in Ireland. So the Global Research Alliance is the coming together of 69 countries looking at sharing research findings, I suppose proposing and prompting progress in relation to research, and the department has been fully engaged from day one in terms of that progress. We have international people here, and I suppose there's a tremendous opportunity in terms of, well, look at how do we structure internationally to be more productive in terms of research and to move the dial. In that context, I suppose it's important that everybody understands the issues of sustainable food systems is a global challenge. It's a global issue, but we see in Ireland and the department in particular that we do need to be at the forefront of leading and progressing in terms of that. That's what's driven the investment by the ministers in terms of research agenda and finding solutions. So that's the first message. So we're unabashedly about science today. The second message really, though, is then that, you know, when you look at climate change, and I've been working this for quite many years, it is one of those wicked problems that's significant, it's large, it can feel almost a little bit overwhelming at times for people. And for the sector and as a department, we're conscious of a role of almost that leadership role of bringing people together to discuss opportunity, to discuss ways of progressing, and almost to give a certain optimism in terms of solutions that are either we have or that we're working on in terms of addressing our footprint and our sustainability credentials. But I have to caveat that with the third message, which is that I'm working at this a long time. There is no silver bullets, and nobody should expect that there are going to be silver bullets. This is about, you know, constantly looking at the science and the evolution in relation to the opportunity that's there. But we must recognise that you cannot wait for that. We have the tools for a lot of the areas that we already know that need to be done and need to be progressed, and I'm sure colleagues will speak to that more than me, and therefore have to deal with our existing knowledge, transferring that onto farms and transferring that into the inventory. Huge work and progress has been made by farmers in relation to actions that are being delivered. So if we had this conference 10 years ago and I proposed that, look, at 2/3 of all slurry would be out by trailing shoe, people would laugh at you, you know. That the seismic changes within fertiliser that's happened would similarly be questioned, or that we have 2,500 farmers who are applying for solar panels in terms of their shed. So the agriculture sector has always been open to change, very progressive in its thinking, but we still have targets that have to be delivered, and that requires action today based on our existing knowledge, and that is a message I also have to give as a conversation. So we've been very open in terms of the metrics, in terms of presentations that have been made today around more needing to be done.
Okay. Mary, Bill said today is all about the science, but for the science to work and to be used, human behaviour has to change. And is there a danger with all that's going on in the world that it's kind of slipped down our list of priorities as a society?
Well, from the Council's perspective, firstly, we base all of our recommendations on science. So a day like today is extremely useful because it allows us to catch up on what's happening and also have some insight as to the direction of travel. And that's hugely important. In terms of achieving the objective, which is, you know, a sustainable society, no longer contributing to global warming, that allows people to have, you know, a successful lifestyle, both in society and in the economic world, means that we need to know where we are firstly. We have to have a vision as to where we want to go, and then we need to set out the pathway. That, to some extent, is what we do with the carbon budgets. But the steps on that pathway come from the scientific analysis. And some of the steps, I've said this repeatedly, you know, there are many different ways you can effect change. You can effect change through legislation. And we all feel that, for example, our building regulations change every so often, and we find that our houses are better insulated as a consequence. So that can be very effective. We can affect change through technological innovation. So, if we're going to drive a car, we can drive an EV. It's less. We also have innovations happening in the agricultural space, which allow us to continue successful farming practices whilst at the same time combating climate change. And that's a key area for us to focus on, because that's really, really important. Very often, there is a capital cost initially in making the change, even though sometimes afterwards the operational cost either will be the same or even less. And that's where government policy, including finance, perhaps plays a role. And as you quite rightly point out, the third area of change then is behavioural change. And that is the most impactful way to achieve a sustainable society. But it is also the most difficult. It is the most difficult because it means that you have to be able to identify what the messages are, communicate them in a way that people can receive the message and understand it, and then support them in acting on the message. And that is perhaps our biggest single challenge. Today we've seen a lot of really interesting developments coming through, research that has proven itself to be effective. Our challenge is, how do we go from, the first 100 farmers doing that to this becoming the norm across all farmers?
Frank, I suppose ideally what Mary said there, her final point, kind of is what Teagasc is all about. It's identifying the message, communicating the message, and supporting people in implementing the message. So
Yeah.
that's what Teagasc is all about, particularly with
Exactly,
samples.
yeah. Just two quick reflections. So I think today, so first of all, I think congratulations to the department for organising this. I think it's been a fantastic day. I think if, Bill, the amount of knowledge that there is now that on display here today, is infantile, or in almost an infinity compared to what we might have had if we had organised a similar conference 10 years ago. So a huge amount of work and knowledge has been accumulated over that time. And you talked, Helen, you asked Mary about, has climate change slipped down our agenda? And to some extent, there is a sense of that, all right. But to me, it's like other things have arrived on the scene, and maybe it's a little bit like, a family being set up. The first child is when you have your first child, everything is focused on that child. And, when I came into this job nearly 4 years ago, climate change was the big issue, and we were very focused on what we could do to support the sector on that. But the second and the third and the fourth children have arrived now. We had water quality arrived as a big issue. We've had competitiveness arrived as a big issue. We've generational renewal as a big issue. And so they're all the children now. And it's not that one pushes the other out of the way, but you have to mind the others as well, I suppose, is the space that we're in now. So look, in Teagasc, I think we have a pivotal role in terms of generating the knowledge and translating the knowledge to farmers and supporting farmers to adopt technology. But look, we recognise we're only one piece of the jigsaw. And we've always said, that advice on its own doesn't bring about practice change, really. It can help, it can lay the groundwork, it can build the knowledge of farmers, the acceptance of it, but very often you need incentives or you need policy to give that bit of a push. And we heard earlier somebody talked, I think it was John at the last session, about low emission slurry spreading. And that was really a combination of advice, of incentives in terms of grants and of regulation that has got us to where we are with that today. And I was very interested to hear Harry Clark in the last session talk about the incentives that Fonterra are paying for low emissions milk. And I suppose really we've been kind of doing things like that for years here in Ireland through the co-ops have sustainability programmes. So I suppose it takes all of those working together really to make a difference. And I think in Ireland, when you stand back, we have a very, very good system now, I think, to support the development and deployment of technologies. It's still not going to be easy, and I think it's really important that we're all on the one page. There's no point Teagasc going off talking to farmers about something and they're hearing something else from another organisation. So I think the work we've done with Board BIA and with ICBF in developing AgNav, with the work we do with the co-ops and the joint programmes with the meat industry in the Future Beef programme and others in the Dairy Beef 500. It's really important getting everybody, I suppose, being consistent or relatively consistent in terms of the messages to farmers. And I think the other thing that's really important as well is that, going out with a single message around climate change and you should do this now, or this would be good because it'll reduce emissions. Like, you have to really look at the bigger picture. You've got to, I think, start when you're talking to farmers through the lens of competitiveness or farm incomes and what this will do for your business, both in the short term, but also in the long term in terms of its resilience and its sustainability. You've got to integrate it with messages around water quality and animal health and so on. So I think, look, we've learned a lot and we're in a very good position, but there's a huge amount of work to be done still.
Edwin, you're dairy farming in Tipperary. You're a signpost farmer as well, and you said to me the other day that I suppose your first job is to grow grass to feed cows. And as a signpost farmer, is it more difficult or easier to grow grass to feed cows?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I suppose a dairy farmer, my job is to feed the cows every day, grass for 150 cows or whatever. But with the signpost farming, it's just been a bit of a change. We've had to adapt, as John said in the previously there in the afternoon. We've to use things like growing clover, reduce our nitrogen and that, and at the same time we need to keep production up, and we've managed to do that. So it hasn't been easier, but it's been achievable, but it has taken a bit of work. Yeah.
And I suppose, does that mean that there's a dedication needed, and would that be part of the reason why we're not seeing as much buy-in as we would like to see from the farming community?
Yeah, there is a dedication needed. It's a different skill set, so you have to learn those skills and teach yourself and take risks and reduce your nitrogen. As John said previously, you have to cut out the nitrogen. That's a risky thing to do because you put your faith in something that you're not sure about, such as clover or multi-species and that. So the old-fashioned Teagasc blueprint was an easy enough one to follow. You followed your cows with a half a bag of nitrogen every 3 to 4 weeks, but that's changing now. We're going with less nitrogen, and we're skipping some paddocks with nitrogen, and trusting the system and trusting the science and the technologies that are there to grow that grass. So at the end of the day, we're still growing the grass, and we're proving. John has proved it, and I've proved it, that we can grow the grass, and we can keep milk production at a sustainable level, and keep farm incomes.
You were saying sometimes, though, the paddocks mightn't look as nice as they used to. They can get a bit rough looking.
Yeah, my father before me was a great man for topping weeds and all of that kind of thing. And another part of the farm sustainability is reducing your chemical sprays and allowing a bit for nature. So under the hedges, and I'm taking a pullback on spraying. So now I spray under the electric wires. I have to keep them fairly right. But around the hedgerows and around even in the middle of the fields, if there's a clump of nettles, it doesn't bother me anymore like it used to. So I suppose in some sense, the paddocks look a little bit more unkept and a bit more unlooked after maybe, but that's part of sustainable farming, to allow and leave some of your farm to nature and for the bees and the butterflies and all of that. That's all part of the end goal, which is sustainable farming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at your farm differently. Seán, we heard earlier in the Board BIA presentation with Jim that I suppose consumers are well-intentioned, and it was even interesting hearing the different perspectives of consumers depending on where they came from. I think in Asia, trust and safety is important. In Europe, it's about locally sourced. In the USA, it's cost pressures. From your point of view in Tirlán, do you feel that consumer demand is still there, or consumer expectation is still there?
Well, I suppose the first comment is we are very fortunate in Tirlán and in the Irish industry to be selling into a market that's growing globally, particularly on the dairy side. And I look forward into the market in the years ahead where we're actually going to be challenged to supply the demand that's there for food products. So that's a very, very good starting place. We've made, as an industry, extraordinary progress over the last number of years on the sustainability front. I'm privileged to work for an organisation that has 5,000 dairy farmers supplying us milk, about 1,000 grain growers, all focused on doing the right thing. They realise that having a sustainable environment is incredibly important for them, both for their production systems, but also for the message that we're sending to the market and the returns that we're getting in those markets. And we've made extraordinary progress. 100% almost of our farmers today are enjoying the benefit of being involved in our Sustainable Action programme, which is, I was listening to Harry earlier, and I was forgiven for saying that I think Fonterra copied the Irish programme in that regard, because we have it in place for a number of years. But in that programme, farmers are taking on scientifically proven actions and getting paid for it. And we're delivering results out of that. 94% of our farmers last year were doing soil sampling. 91% are involved in low emission spreading of slurry. We have a 21% increase in the usage of protected urea. So our farmers are taking on board all of this activity, and then it's our challenge to go to market and sell the product. Now, the truth of the matter is, though, the market is good intentions, yes, until it comes to writing the cheque, or until it comes to going up to that cash register. And that is something that's a very big challenge for us. The question is, what we're involved in today, yes, some of the actions will deliver economically on the farm in their own right, others cost quite significantly to implement. Is the market going to pay for this? And that is a real challenge that's out there. And if it doesn't, ultimately in a cooperative, the primary producer has to pay the cost involved in that. So we have to be real in that regard. Now, that doesn't mean we don't go after it, because there is other very significant dimensions to achieving a sustainable environment for producing your food. But it's difficult, and there's very different dynamics in the market. I just come back from a trip last week to China, meeting our customers there. They have an extraordinary ambition to grow their dairy consumption. The Chinese have set a target between now and 2030 of growing their annual consumption by 2.4% per year, and there's 1.4 billion citizens there. Extraordinary opportunity. Will they pay for sustainability? No. Will they want high quality product produced in a very clean environment? Yes, and that's what Ireland can do. So it is difficult to get the market. Not impossible. There are some very good customers, I should add, and we're very fortunate to have them. But in the main, it's challenging.
So how confident are you that it is something that the consumer can be convinced is worth paying for?
It's going to be a big challenge. And of course, the consumer is not a generic entity either. It varies across the various markets we're in. But there are markets, fortunately, that have the capability to pay for and will pay for some of what's been involved here. But it's a difficult sell, let's be frank about it. And yet at the same time, we place increasing challenge on our farmers to achieve very, very high standards. But I'm of a view that we're going to have to continuously communicate and engage with consumers so that they understand that if they want the product produced in this fashion, in the highest quality possible, in the most sustainable environment, which I would argue this country enjoys, there will be a cost that the consumer will have to bear.
Okay. Oonagh, we heard the Taoiseach this morning talk about, I suppose, policy developments around climate change. Where do we stand now as regards our climate action plan and achieving targets? And is there anything coming down the line to us both nationally and at a European level?
Thanks very much for the question, and thanks very much for the invite to be here. I'm sorry I wasn't here for the whole day because it sounds like it was a very interesting day. I did have a few colleagues who were acting as my avatars and were feeding me little snippets of information over the course of the day. I believe there's a West Cork farm I have to visit that's at net zero, and thankfully that's where I'm from, so that'll be a handy way to get home. But just in terms of, and I obviously wasn't here there for the Taoiseach speech, but I know that Laura Burke spoke, and she spoke about the challenge that we have around what the EPA has held up a mirror to us in terms of our targets and how close or far from achieving them that we are. Ireland is in an unusual place, as we all know, and I've been thinking over the last little while, and Bill will almost think this heresy, but is there some way we could turn to our advantage the fact that Ireland is unusual in European terms of having such a large proportion of its greenhouse gas emissions in the agricultural sector? Can we turn that to our advantage in some way? In particular, is there a way in which working with everybody in this room and working with the industry in innovative and unusual ways, the sorts of things you've been hearing about all day and that even I heard a small bit of here this afternoon, we can have an outsized impact on our greenhouse gas emissions relative to the rest of Europe. And I know that farmers, I've worked with farmers in the past, I know that they're incredibly pragmatic business people, and they will do where the economics leads them to do. They're probably the most efficient small business people we have in the country in that regard. So some of the things we need to think about is, are there ways, taking on board what you've just said, we're generally a high-cost economy. We produce high-value goods. We have to find markets that will pay for them. But are there ways in which we can do that bring value back to the farm, but also ensure that we have things that we can sell, whether into Europe or otherwise? So you asked me very specifically, is there more coming? Yes, there are. There are 2040 targets, and then there are 2050 targets. So from a European level, we're currently working towards our 2030 targets. And as I say, Laura Burke will have told you today that in many respects we're badly off course, or quite badly off course to those. Some of the adjustments to those figures is because we're a year closer to 2030. Some is a greater pragmatism of some of the challenges we face in terms of supply chains and so on and so forth. That being said, we're a good long way down the road. There's been a big shift in usage on things like nitrates, and we've just heard that nitrogen fertilizer into farms and things like that. Huge behavioural change that if we can replicate that across the country, we can really make a big difference. The 2040 targets will be led by the science, as Marie has said, will be the proposed 2040 targets will be announced at European level in the next few weeks. They will have to be worked through then at a national level, and it's likely that Ireland's presidency, which is the second half of next year, will play a key role in determining how those land at the national level, if I can put it that way, for European terms. And obviously we're all working towards a 2050 net zero target. So this is part of the progression that we're going along. And I know that it can feel incredibly challenging to think about even 2030, 2040, 2050. I actually have quite a significant leadership issue in my own department because people see these targets and think, sure, we can't make them. What are we about? You know, why are we turning up for work every day? And what I keep on having to say to people is we've done huge work, like even in the energy side, which I'm closest to in my department. We're out of peat for energy. This month we'll get out of coal burning for energy. We are decarbonising our energy system as fast as we humanly can, and we've come a huge way. Just the same way in farming, we have come a huge way. And I know with innovation, with a huge amount of collaborative work between the private sector, with farmers and with the government, through Teagasc and those, we can deliver a huge amount more effort. And actually, I think, no pressure, Bill, that if the Department of Agriculture and the farming sector can over-deliver, we would really do a lot for Ireland in that space.
Bill, we talk, and Oonagh mentioned Laura's presentation earlier on, and the target for 2030 was 25%. Best case scenario we heard now would be 16%. Were you expecting the gap to be that wide, and do you think we can bridge it?
I know, so just from a kind of a metrics point of view, and this is a maths question really rather than anything else, so what the EPA have done is they've modelled forward based on what are the individual actions. And Laura was also clear, let's say, in terms of the inability to transfer diversification into that modelling. And that's what makes up that differential. We can argue on the whys and wherefores, but it is possible to make 25%.
Right.
It requires a hell of a lot of action. The way we structure it, or the way I articulate it, is there are almost three different strands. One is the inputs and additives, so you're talking about fertiliser, additives, etc. The other is breeding and feeding. How do we breed improvement into our animals? And the third really thing is that opportunity for diversification and income generation by farmers in other actions, whether it's arable, whether it's anaerobic digestion, whether it's forestry, whether it's organics, etc. So that is an inherent challenge. But before Mary Donnelly kind of comes in and because, like, I want to be clear with everybody, the reality is that we're dealing with an envelope. So as time progresses, that envelope becomes harder to deal with because if you're not on a trajectory that allows you to, I suppose, eat the elephant in parts, you're left with a very big elephant at the end of it. I suppose I go back to a few of the comments that were by colleagues on this, and what's the value of an event like this, though, is that we have incredibly challenging targets. You have to break that down into opportunity for agriculture in terms of how it's going to tackle that. And one of the critical things around this, and where the department can facilitate through engagement like this is ensuring that there's consistent messages to farmers like Edwin in terms of what needs to be done. Okay, and we are in a very robust media environment at the moment, and there's a lot of information, and it can be conflicting and it can be contradictory, and who do you believe, etc. Whereas through events like this and the department's role and an open door policy in terms of engaging with all stakeholders, at least we can create a consistency of messaging to farmers as to what actually is required, and an honesty, which was inclusive of today, around how does that translate into the inventory, and I suppose the successes or not successes associated with those. And today we've been very transparent in that.
Now, Mary, it's your turn.
Well, of course, Bill, you're absolutely right. But people are going to start falling asleep if we don't come out with a few comments. And I would make two comments. One is diversification. I was going to say it's a black box. It's actually a green box, because we also have a black box, but we have a green box. It's diversification is going to deliver, and we have a number, and we have no idea what we're talking about, what the contribution of any of the given elements are, what the timeline is for the delivery of those, and how we're going to get emission reduction on that basis. So without that kind of clarity and support coming through at the policy level, diversification is just a word.
Right.
Let's be blunt about it. We talk about beef and dairy. We talk about beef and dairy. We talk about beef and dairy. We don't talk about anything else. Do we grow even an apple in this country? What about the organics? What about the tillage? You know, where are we with the other parts of farming? And this is a favourite one. Frank knows, I've been at him for years. Why do we not consider forestry to be farming? It doesn't appear in the farm income survey. Do we not consider forestry to be farming? And why don't we include it in that? So I think, you know, being a little bit controversial here now, I think we need to open our minds as to what's out there. It's not just beef and dairy. We have been very successful, and I hope it continues. But there's much more to farming than that. And we need to be very clear about what are the options, what are the alternatives, and put supports in place for farmers to have those alternatives available to them and get the delivery out of those.
So be more specific about the diversification.
Absolutely.
And then forestry is farming rather than just what to do with a bad field.
Precisely.
Absolutely. Look, I'd agree with Mary in that, and we do publish at the same time that we publish the National Farm Income Statistics, we do publish, you know, the return for investing in forestry or planting forestry. And look, diversification, it is an important part of the plan to deliver our emissions, as Bill said, it's somewhere maybe around 7%. And it's not those if nothing has happened, I suppose. You know, for me, the big diversification options that we look at in this country, are in no particular order of importance, but organics is one. I consider that kind of a diversification option, and we have made very good progress in that. We don't have good empirical data on what difference it makes in terms of emissions, but we will have that soon. Tillage is another one. We want to grow the tillage. You know, it's not as if it's a new enterprise or anything like that. It's a tough slog for tillage farmers at the moment. You know, incomes are poor compared to maybe alternatives, and so despite efforts maybe made by the department in terms of supporting tillage farmers, it's really running to stand still. But we do have a very vibrant tillage industry, really good farmers in it. Our approach to that, or the input we can give to that, is trying to get more of our grain into higher value markets. The big opportunity we see there is the drinks industry. Ireland produces fantastic beverages, and with support from the department last week, we opened the new National Centre for Brewing and Distilling to support that sector, both the small ones and indeed the big ones. But I suppose the big diversification option from a climate point of view is anaerobic digestion. And look, I think we've made some progress. The strategy has been published. We need to see the RHO, the renewable heat obligation for that. But there's a lot of work to be done on that. But I suppose we are making some headway on it. And just the clap for apples. I hope you were clapping for the fact that we have initiated an apple research programme in Oak Park in the last 2 years. We do see a great opportunity for apple production in Ireland, but it's not going to be a big change to our emissions, because the amount of land that you would need to develop a good-sized apple industry is quite small. And it's the same with our, I'm a great supporter of horticulture. I think Ireland should have a lot more of it, but it doesn't take a lot of land to, I suppose, meet our fruit and vegetable needs.
Edwin, on a more positive note, it's something that I suppose you think Ireland's quite unique model of the family farm could be a strength when it does come to, I suppose, farming in a more sustainable, greener way.
Yeah, Helen, it's just an observation I have, and I think Irish farming, we're very tied to the land. We have a great affinity with the land for multi-generations, and I think we care, in general, we care a lot about it, and I received the farm from my father in great shape, and he planted trees, he did hedgerows and that, and I'm going to continue that on and pass it on to my kids. And I think there's a real willingness to make it more sustainable, and I think that family bond is a bit unique in Ireland, and I'd like to see that tradition, those traditions in Ireland kept strong in that sense.
It's about having something sustainable in every sense of the word to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah, every sense. The next generation will be look at it differently to the way we looked at it, and they'll be more educated, and other little things will come into play. But if we can pass on the farm to them in a reasonable shape, they'll have the opportunity to do that.
Okay, you wanted to come in on that, Frank?
Just very briefly on that, I think, often we don't know enough maybe of where our system of production fits into the kind of global system. And you talked about China a minute ago, and the type of model they want to build for their dairy industry is quite a large-scale intensive model. And it reminded me that about 2 years ago we had a visit from a group of American farmers here. There were about 50 of them, so they fit on a bus. And I remember reading down through their little profiles, and the average herd size was about 5,000 cows. Wow. So 250,000 cows were owned by the people on this one bus.
I hope the bus didn't crash.
It's not even as big as that. They were producing twice the yield approximately as an Irish cow per cow. Wow. So they were producing as much milk almost as a third of Irish dairy farmers. So that just gives you maybe some sense of the scale of kind of intensive agriculture in some parts of the world, not every part of the world, in comparison to the family farm system that we have here in Ireland with an average herd size of about 100 cows. And that's not to say that there isn't an awful lot that needs to be done on our 100 cow herds. Of course there is, and people like Edwin have been leading the way in terms of showing what can be done. But we do have a very different model. We should be proud of it, and we should, I suppose, work within that model to try to make it as good as we can in relation to all the various sustainability parameters.
Seán, a lot of the discussion today has been about, I suppose, finding the technologies, proving the technologies work, and bringing them into practice on our farms. In the next few years, what areas in particular, when it comes to translating the technology to the farm, where would you like to see us pay more attention to?
I'll come at a slightly different angle, and I will try and answer your question then. I think in the next number of years, our biggest concern is actually having farmers to farm. We're going to do a lot of great work here over the next number of years in terms of what we need to do on our missions. Rightly so, it's important, and we're committed to that. But we need to be very careful that we actually have farmers who want to actually farm the land. It is, in my view, an emerging crisis internationally, not just in Ireland, but well beyond our shores, attracting young people into farming. And we need to be careful, even in venues like this, that we're sending out an industry message here that this is a great industry. There's a wonderful market opportunity. We have science and technology, we have support and everything for people to engage in farming. But if we're not very careful, we'll run out of those options. And I can see it. Over the last decade, we took in about 500 new entrants into dairy in Tirlán. Our colleagues in the industry did similar proportional. But now we're at a point where the exits are much higher than the folk who want to go into it. And that's despite the fact that actually right now, in beef and dairy Mary, farming is very good. They might even admit it. It's actually very good. But we run a serious danger there. And we could end up, if we're not very careful here after a period of time, where we have made great progress on the environment, but we've endangered the security of food in the world. Yeah. And we rightly see a role that we have, even though we're a small island making a very small impact, that we still have a responsibility to do the right thing by the environment. I argue we equally have responsibility do the right thing by producing food for a nation and for a world that's growing rapidly. I was looking at a young lady here, a little lady, 4 or 5-year-old, you mightn't have seen her in the background.
4-year-old. The best behaved person in the room.
I was just going to say I was extremely impressed at the attention she was paying to the last sessions. But what are we going to say to that young lady when she's the average age of the group here that are sitting in front of us, when we've solved that problem, but we don't have security of food? And I have a fear that in 2 or 3 decades, we'll be sitting here in this wonderful venue with a wonderful MC like yourself, having a conversation about why did we get it so wrong? And my challenge here today to science in action is that we need to solve 2 challenges. One, yes, we need to get the environmental piece absolutely right. But secondly, and this is the hard challenge, we need to do that whilst growing our food production, not cutting it, not taking it away. The world needs our food. Our rural society in Ireland needs the income stream that derives. And our farmers need to see a progressive industry that's growing and expanding and developing, not being curtailed. So what would I like to see, to go back to answer the question you've asked me, I would like to see us try and answer the duality, those 2 questions, not just one of them. And I think we need to invest more in research, in investment, but particularly in extension to bring that knowledge that's been developed in very complex pieces now. Some of the presentations we had in the last while are complex. And getting that out to the farmer who every day is busily trying to do his job and doesn't have the resource base that I'm privileged to have. I have Lisa and Helen, or Louise rather, and Thomas with me here today to make sure that I understand all these pieces. We need to continuously invest in that, but not put a blank check now, with very stringent KPIs for those involved in that arena.
Okay. It's a good point, and it's something that is very obviously a huge concern for farmers. Generation renewal, it seems to be the biggest concern for a lot of farmers at the moment. Do you wanted to come in, Bill, from that?
Yeah, so look, I agree with an awful lot that's being said right across the board here, but just one of the things I want to tie it back into today's event, which is to lay down the challenge by Seán in terms of solving that problem. Now, I was at an event last week, and Harry, who spoke at the last one, was also at it in relation to chief scientists from a number of countries coming together in terms of it. And all I can assure people and farmers is there's a global challenge in terms of this question of food and environment and sustainable food systems. And the value and objective, I suppose, of the department's investment in research and engagement today, events like today, is that opportunity to highlight, well, look, we are actually engaged globally in terms of trying to deliver solutions for farmers and for the food system. But I can assure you, almost every country in the world is looking at it from different perspectives, but are challenged by this question of food security for a growing population who view things differently depending on where they're at. And I describe it often to farmers that there's a hierarchy here. If you are actually, in the first instance, hungry, your first priority is availability of food. After that, it doesn't really bother you. The second standard then is the safety of it, and that is not certain globally. The third level then is the sustainability of it, and the next one will be then food and health and how those interact. We very much play at that sustainability offering that's there to the market, and all I want to convey is, look, that is something that a lot of countries are looking at in terms of how do they improve their food production systems in that context. And an event like today really, I suppose, evidences our international collaboration, our international engagement of our research offering to facilitate and ensure that, I suppose, this is taken at a global level.
Okay. Now, I'm going to have to come because it has come in repeatedly today as a question. It's quite a complex issue, but I'm told you're the man who can answer it in a very simple, straightforward way, I'm sure, Bill, that there has been some tension recently on emission metrics, GWP and GWP 100, basically about how we calculate our emissions, and it is complex, but how are we doing it here in Ireland?
So this is the debate and the suggestion that agriculture is promulgating a view about GWP star, and that should be the new metric. I want to be very clear, and there are people who are better placed on this panel to answer this. The simple reality is that the reporting structure internationally is around GWP 100, okay? That is comparing all gases over a 100-year period in the calculation of budgets or targets, etc. And I do not see that changing anytime soon. The EPA is the responsible authority, and we had Laura here in terms of reporting under that structure. Okay. This suggestion on us that GWP Star solves problems for agriculture, it's certainly not something that's crossing my desk. It's certainly not something that we're engaged in terms of discussions on, in the knowledge that the current accounting mechanism is the current accounting mechanism in relation to it. I have certainly advocated in terms of, in line with Peter Thorne this morning, saying, well, look, should there be a separate target? It's a question you ask, should there be a separate target for methane? For a number of reasons. One is, as Peter articulated, there's a separate trajectory that's required, but also in terms of the public discourse, in terms of, you know, well, look, is it methane or is it carbon dioxide is the main issue. I'm not going to answer that. Quite simply, we have an accounting mechanism, GWP 100, which will continue for the foreseeable future. That's what we work with. That's the way the EPA will account for it. End of.
Okay. Well, one thing I want to come to you, and I haven't had a chance to talk to you much, but from the point of view of, you had mentioned that what could be seen as a perceived problem or obstacle could, if utilised properly, become part of the solution, the agricultural sector. And the fact that we're touching on things like, I suppose, the family farm, the uniqueness of the model of the Irish family farm, and also concerns, as Seán had said, about generational renewal and making sure the next generation of farmers are still there from an environmental point of view as well as from a food security point of view. But how confident are you that the agricultural sector in Ireland can, I suppose, play as big a role as it should in addressing the issue and become as big a part of the solution as they can?
Thank you for the question, and I was really struck by what Edwin said about the sustainability and wanting to pass it from generation to generation, because there's this concept, as you know, in climate justice, which is called the just transition. And just transition also means just transition between the generations, I think. And it has to be the case that we enable the people who are farmers in this country to pass their farms from generation to generation in reasonably good order, with a reasonably good prospect of there being a future for farming. I'm very struck as well by an aspect I just haven't heard it come up here at the moment, which is around adaptation and the fact that or even resilience, because we have climate effects that are real right now. Farmers are peculiarly, I think, exposed to those climate effects. So it's really, really important that we work with family farmers to make sure that they can continue to do their livelihood, to lead into that energy security we all need, and then also to pass that on to the next generation. And there's, I think, a lot that can be done on the ground, and people sitting on this stage know far more about it than I do, in terms of working with the land, working with what's around us in the system to ensure that we can manage the effects, the real here and now effects of climate change into the future. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would say, and just to pick up on Bill's quite right, like we're bound by a sort of an international metric on how we measure things. But there's certainly scope, I think, for our two departments to work together in a European stage in particular to try and see whether there's things we can argue collectively. We're an outsized voice in agricultural terms on the EU stage, as I believe the Commissioner was here earlier, shows. And so there's things that when we work together, we develop a common platform between our departments that can go in and speak to that common platform, that we can potentially work together as policymakers to help people on the ground to do their job. Fundamentally as well, the other thing I was really struck about this is that the conversation often moves around the key areas. This year, it's sustainability. Next year, it's affordability. The following year, it's security. We have to take all of those things into account at all times, and we have to try and balance them out as policymakers and as individuals working on the ground to see, can we deliver. This is an incredibly complex problem that we're trying to do. We need to feed people. We need to feed people at a price that they can afford, and we need to do so in a way which means we don't destroy our planet for future generations. That is a really complex thing to do.
That's really simply the challenge.
And just to make sure, look at it, what Oonagh is articulating about working together is fully in line with the programme for government.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. We're running out of time. There's a red number flashing at me. I'm going to give the final word to the farmer on the panel. Edwin, you had said that you, like most farmers, you enjoy learning. and that this is all about learning to farm in a different way. How positive are you hearing about all the advances that are coming towards your farm, but how positive are you that you can farm in a more sustainable way and that you'll have a healthy farm to hand on to a generation that are willing to take over?
Excuse me, yeah. I'm really impressed by the global feel that's here in the audience. I look around and I see people from every part of the world, and all striving for the same sort of objective, which is to farm in a sustainable way. So I'm very encouraged by that, and also I feel that the industries are pulling in the right direction and pulling together. So that gives me encouragement as well. I think farmers, 99% of farmers in Ireland that I know, will do their best to look after their own farms, look after the environment while making a living. And if we can get the supports from the government, and I would encourage for the 2040 legislation negotiations, maybe look after the Irish family farm, and I think the future is bright. I'm hopeful and I'm encouraged by what I've heard here today. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Nice to finish on a positive note, Edwin. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank all of our panel, Bill, Mary, Frank, Edwin, Seán and Oonagh. Thank you all very much for joining us. And I'd like to... I'd like to thank you all for coming today, for your participation, for the questions through Slido. I'm sorry we didn't get to go through as many of them as we would have liked to, but we really do appreciate your participation. All of today's presentations will be on the department's website in due course. Keep an eye on the website and on the social media notifications. You'll find out when they're available. I hope you're all leaving here enthused and informed and determined. And now to close proceedings, I'd like to invite up Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, Martin Heydon.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much to the panel. Thanks, Helen. We've come to the end of what has been a really important conference. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your participation, but particularly for staying till the very end. It says a lot about the itinerary that was put together today, that so many people are still been here and have committed the full day to this. And I know it's been a long day, and I don't intend to sum up each individual presentation or session, but I do want to offer some concluding thoughts before you depart. To begin with, and to state the obvious, we are living through one of the most turbulent, unpredictable periods in generations when it comes to geopolitics, trade, international relations, and so much more. And cutting across all those issues is climate change, which Peter Thorne laid out in very stark terms this morning, the challenge and the issue that we face there. And while some may be stepping back from this challenge, that is a moment when others can step forward. And stepping forward makes sense. The next 10 to 15 years will be crucial in our shared ambition to do this in a way which brings people with us. We have to harness that Irish sense of meitheal, which means community, where every sector of the economy and society comes together to do its bit in addressing what is a defining challenge of our time. We have to be able to look our children in the eye and say we did our part. And farmers are on the front line of this. And I know firsthand, as a farmer myself, from a farming family, surrounded by farmers, dealing with farmers on a daily basis in my role now as Minister for Agriculture, that they're up for this. It matters to farmers. It matters in a way that it might not to other sectors of society or the economy, because it's farmers' livelihood that's at stake here. So if I swap a diesel or petrol car for an electrical vehicle, I can still commute to work, and that core principle doesn't change. If any of us go into a room and switch on a light and it's powered by renewable energy as opposed to oil or gas, the light still comes on. But for farmers, farming is a way of life. It's an intrinsic part of their identity and who they are. And it's why farmers must be at the heart of the solutions in agriculture, because changes here can impact their ability to provide for their family and to make an income and have a quality of life. And not only is this the right thing to do by the planet, but it also is the smart business play too here. We are an exporting nation. Most of the food and drink we produce is sold overseas and targeted towards markets that provide the best return on these products. But it is a globally competitive marketplace, and adding strong sustainability credentials to our already renowned safety and traceability and taste appeal positions us well in those highly competitive markets, as described very well by Jim O'Toole, Sarah O'Neill and Seán Molloy. We are also taking action because our farmers are on the front line of climate change. Conor Murphy left us in no doubt about the direct impact that droughts, floods and other weather events caused by global warming will have on our farmers and our foresters, as we saw starkly earlier this year as a result of Storm Owen. These events can negatively affect crop yields and quality, livestock health and productivity, and timber production. So for farmers, climate change is a real and present danger to their businesses and to their collective ability to produce food. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to claim that we have all the solutions here, but in agriculture, reducing emissions of greenhouse gases is a challenge. These emissions arise from the normal practices employed in agriculture right across the globe, whether in livestock or crop production. At its simplest, food is carbon, and producing it will have a footprint. Changing this without impacting on food production isn't easy, and if it was, it would have been done long before now. It is why we in countries across the globe are investing so much in research around this area, to ensure that we are producing this food with the lowest carbon footprint possible. And this brings me to the presentations from the State of Science sessions. I think you will all agree that what we heard was truly impressive in terms of the strides that have been made in agriculture and climate science, innovation and technology. The Teagasc Marginal Abatement Cost Curve, or MAC as we know it, shows that approximately 60% of the measures are cost negative or cost neutral and can be implemented now. Farmers across the country are changing their fertiliser use, changing how they apply slurry, incorporating clover and multi-species plants into our world-renowned grassland pastures, using genetics to breed lower-emitting animals, planting trees, and so much more. These are all tools which have been proven through publicly funded research. Farmers have had the confidence to adopt these measures as a result of this work. The presentations from the science sessions demonstrate clearly that we are racing to add to these measures. And we have reason to be confident that in the short to medium term, we will have at our disposal an even greater range of farming practices and technologies, and we can meet our twin aims of reducing emissions while continuing to produce food, timber, and other products that we need. So delegates, this is a sector that has already demonstrated its ability to evolve. I remember as a small boy, a farmer's son, with my father at the cattle mart in Kilcullen in the 1980s. And farmers around the ring turning to my father and then to me saying there was little future in agriculture for young people like me. That was in the 1980s. We had the Maastricht reforms of the 90s. We had Fischler reforms. We had greening. We had Brexit. We had Ukraine. We had cost of living crisis. And every time young farmers' sons and daughters were told by older, more pessimistic farmers, there's no future for you in farming. Well, you know what? We as a country are still farming today. Plenty of young farmers who were told that during those generations are still farming today and will be into the future. Farming has changed, it's adapted, but we are still farming now. We don't still farm the same way we did 10, 15 years ago, and we won't be farming the same way as we are now in 10 or 15 years' time. My department has invested over €48 million in climate-related research since 2020, meaning that we now account for 1/5 of the entire public research support for climate research across all areas. We will continue to make similar investments into the future, including the new awards that will be announced later this year from the 2025 thematic research call under my colleague Minister of State, Noel Greedish. We will also continue our global leadership role through international research collaboration in initiatives such as the Global Research Alliance for Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. Through these activities, we are empowering scientists, researchers and experts to explore new frontiers, push boundaries and find creative solutions to complex challenges. Government will also continue to provide support through a variety of measures. In our CAP strategic plan, we have seen 97% of farmers take up eco-schemes here, a standout participation rate compared to other EU member states, and recognising the enormous space for nature that already exists on thousands of farms across the country. Climate action is also supported through the €1.5 billion acre scheme, where we have seen over 2,500 kilometres of new hedgerow planted and 800,000 native trees sown. Recently, I announced funding of €17.8 million for 11 new EIP projects, European Innovation Partnership projects, most of which contribute to climate action across areas such as regenerative agriculture, soil health and carbon farming. I said after my appointment as a Minister for Agriculture just over 4 months ago that I wanted to communicate a fresh understanding of what it is our farmers, our fishers, our foresters and the food industry contribute to Irish society and the economy. We need to explain better that contribution that agriculture makes, because the roots of this sector run deep. There isn't a parish in the country that isn't enriched by the contribution made by farmers, or where some small business doesn't depend on this sector for its existence. The sector is responsible for the stewardship of 4.5 million hectares of agricultural land and over 800,000 hectares of forestry. It consists of 133,000 farms, 2,000 fishing vessels and aquaculture sites, and over 2,000 food production and beverage enterprises. It employs over 171,000 people, representing 6.4% of our total workforce, but a far greater proportion in rural and coastal areas. In an increasingly globalised world, the Irish agri-food sector is a world leader. All of this is underpinned and made possible by the work of our farmers. I will continue to champion the great work being done by farmers and our entire agri-food sector in becoming more sustainable, both at home and abroad. Next week, I will lead a trade mission to Korea and Japan, and I will be taking that opportunity, along with colleagues in Borbia, to explain to our international customers the attributes of Irish food, including on sustainability. In concluding, ladies and gentlemen, I want to leave you with one last reflection. 200 years ago, on the cusp of the 18th century, an English economist predicted that the world's population would outgrow food supply. The result would be disease, war, famine and calamity. What Thomas Malthus failed to account for was advancements in agricultural productivity. Farming kept pace. Farming adapted, it changed, it innovated, and it kept populations fed, growing populations. The cost of failing to do so is very, very high, obviously. In Ireland, we know that all too well, the spectra of famine. We are among a handful of countries in the world where we have a population today that is smaller than it was in the 18th century. The story of our agriculture sector is one shaped by this history. We have transformed from a farming model based on protectionism and self-sufficiency to one that is innovative and outward-facing. And as a result, Ireland has risen to be among the most food-secure nations in the world. And we now have a new challenge to face. Progress on ending hunger globally has stalled. The number of people waking up hungry around the world has not fallen since 2015, and in more recent years has been climbing again. Current estimates are by 2050 we will need to produce 60% more food than we do right now to feed the world population. And every indication is we'll have to do all of that with less. Less land, less inputs, and less certainty about weather patterns. These aren't far-off realities. Spring 2024 was a stark reminder of this. As a world leader in agricultural production, based on some of the highest production standards in the world, Ireland and the EU is well placed and has a responsibility to lead on what is the fundamental challenge of our time. So let us use this opportunity today to redouble our commitment and our efforts in a joined-up collaborative way. Researchers, advisors, technology providers, farmers, foresters and industry, all working together for a common goal. I want to thank each and every one of you for making the effort to be here today and for participating in such a meaningful way. As I said earlier, the large attendance shows the interest and enthusiasm of this great sector for playing our part, and I commend each and every one of you for that. I also want to thank the speakers and panellists who contributed the very rich content that I think you all agree provided much food for thought. I know how much work went into everybody being involved here. Thanks to our excellent moderator, Helen Carroll, the team in Morrow Communications and the team here in Dublin Castle, and all the backroom staff that were involved in making today a reality. And finally, a special word of thank you to my own departmental team, led by the Research Division and Climate Division. They have put in a huge amount of work in bringing together this event over the last number of months. That work has taken place, and I want to acknowledge the great job they've done. We are a great team in the department. We have fantastic people who work in there that we're really, really proud of, and I think you saw today the talent that there is across all those different sectors. So again, thank you to each and every one of you. I hope you got as much out of it as we did, and I wish everyone a very safe trip home. Thank you very much.